Excited to have the opportunity to present today. As you already said, this is joint work with Lisa Sophie Höcke from the RWI in Essen, and I'm from the Free University of Bolzano. And our paper has the title "Starting Off on the Right Foot: Integrative Schooling and the Educational Success of Immigrant Children in Primary School." So the overall context of our setting is the large asylum seeker and immigrant inflow in the recent years. We can see that it reached its peak in 2015, 2016. And once the EU-Turkish deal came to effect, it started declining again. But clearly, if we would plot this further on to end of 2022 now, we would likely see another very large increase with immigrants from Ukraine coming to Germany. But what has been overlooked a little bit is that among all those immigrants and asylum seekers is also a very large share of children. So at the peak in 2016, we can see that there was 200,000 asylum applications from children below the age of 14. And all those children have the right and the obligation to go to school in Germany, and therefore they have to be integrated into the German school system. The decision makers, they were very clear that integration succeeds with education. But while many countries have very well researched methods and strategies on how to integrate the adult population into the labor market, how to provide language classes for them, there's actually very little knowledge and evidence on how to best integrate newly arrived children into the education system. So what are the options when children arrive in Germany, but also in any other country where they don't speak the host language? So even though there is no doubt from the decision makers that the integration and the education of the children is very important, there's actually not one model that is applied or one model that has been researched or used in different scenarios. And just like with other policies in Germany, the federal states have some liberty and freedom what to implement and how to integrate new arrived students into the education system. But even though within federal states, we still see different models being applied. So I will show you the two models that are used in the setting where we're at in the federal state that we look at, but those are also the ones that are mostly used in Germany, but also as far as we know in most developed countries. So we can see here on the left, which would be the parallel model, which means that the students that don't speak German are upon arrival basically put in a separate classroom only with other immigrant students where they focus on learning the German language. They have German as a second language teacher, they have smaller classrooms, and they really focus for 1 year usually on language acquisition before being integrated in the regular classroom with all the other children. And the idea behind those classes is to provide those kids a safe space to learn, to provide a little bit more attention due to smaller classrooms and a specially certified teacher. On the other hand, we have the integrative model, which means that children that immigrate into the country don't speak the language, but they are still directly integrated into the regular classroom, so with all the other children together. And then usually they receive additional language classes on the side. But right away, they are exposed to all of the curriculum and also to other German and other students in the regular classroom. So what could work here is that they're really exposed more to German and German in a more natural setting, but also to more kids that speak their language. So the question that we're trying to answer in this paper is, what is the effect of attending a parallel preparatory class that focuses on language learning in primary school on the educational success of refugee children? We measure the success by the results in a standardized test in grade 5, which is called in our setting the Kermit test, and tracking into the academic track, so the gymnasium after 4th grade in Germany. And it is very crucial to integrate those students well into the education system, because even before they arrived, Germany was the country with the largest immigrant native gap. So here, this is an example from the PISA study in 2015 for baseline academic proficiency. And we can see that the gap between immigrants and natives is the largest in Germany. but nevertheless, it exists in every other country as well. So here in the United States and Italy, but also like in the all of EU and OECD countries. So this is not just a German phenomenon, it's for every country. And every country we see here receives actually a large share of immigrants. In the US, 10% of the whole student body are made up from English language learners. So our identification relies on the fact that refugees that come to Germany are cannot choose where they live. So we exploit like a quasi random assignment of them into the different federal states. And also when they arrive in Hamburg, in the federal state we look at, they are then assigned by a central system. So they cannot choose freely where they live. Once they arrive,
Alice has one question, I think.
Yes, sorry, thank you. Just a clarifying question, if that's okay, I don't know for the format to ask it. So on this graph for the US and other countries, you have this negative gap for immigrants. So how does it align with this narrative that we often hear about how immigrants often overtake natives in their labor market and educational and other performances, let's say in the US?
I mean, I will go into that a little bit in the literature, how immigrant students kind of affect native students. But overall, yeah, there is definitely a gap in the PISA results between both groups.
Right, but in the longer term, there is an opposite thing from what I heard in the literature, right? That immigrants, especially second gen, oftentimes perform better.
Right, the second generation. I think usually from what I remember from the literature, the first generation kind of needs the time to catch up. But this PISA results were from the first generation immigrants.
Ah, this is only first, okay.
Right. Sorry, I didn't say that, yeah. So in Hamburg, when the families arrived, they are centrally allocated to their accommodation. And once the parents arrive in the communal accommodation centers, the children have the obligation to go to school, so independent of their asylum status. This is usually before the decision is made and before they know the acceptance or decline of their asylum status. So the parents go to the so-called school information center, sign their kid up, and then the school information center basically allocates the children based on proximity to where the parents live, but also based on availability to the schools. So from the perspective of the refugee family, the school the child goes to is basically random, and also whether the school offers a preparatory class or not. It's unrelated to the student characteristics, and the parents cannot influence it. So just a thread would be if all the schools or all the refugee centers would be like in different areas in Hamburg. So here we see a map of Hamburg. In blue, we can see the refugee accommodations. In red, the elementary schools. And the green shades are, it's called like a development index. So it looks a little bit at the neighborhood characteristics, so a low development to high development index, looking at children that receive social benefits on the parents, unemployment, children from migration backgrounds, recipients of asylum benefits. So kind of like giving a picture of the composition of the area. And we can see here that both refugee camps or refugee accommodations are quite well spread out over the whole city. So they are not clustered in one area or clustered in low development areas or anything in that direction. So to the best of our knowledge, this is the first paper that provides empirical evidence to see the causal effect of educational integration models for newly immigrated primary school-aged children on their educational success. We use unique administrative data from the city-state of Hamburg to explore the exogenous allocation of refugees to school as a natural experiment. And to give you a little bit of a preview of the results, so we find that children who attend the parallel classes that focus on language learning at the beginning do significantly worse on their standardized test scores in grade 5. We do not find that this has an effect on the track choice of the secondary school. and that students who visit those preparatory classes are staying together with more students from the same classroom, from this initial classroom, and that they later, when they switch schools after 4th grade, the classroom, they are in classrooms with a higher immigrant share. So I'm going to be a little bit quicker on our contribution and the literature that we contribute to. So we contribute to the literature that looks at the school environment of newly arrived students, but also linked to the literature of refugee integration. There have been 2 very recent papers that also look at Syrian refugees in, oh no, 3 papers, sorry, that look at Syrian refugees in Turkey. Second, we contribute to the literature about peer effects, and that peer effects are important for educational performance. The literature is quite clear that students benefit from being in classrooms with a high socioeconomic background around them, but then there's mixed evidence on the effect of the proportion of language minority students in the classroom. So for Austria, it has been found that specifically the immigrant share in the classroom has a negative effect on other immigrant students. This has been the paper by Schneeweiss in 2015. For the Netherlands and I think the US and Florida, they find a positive effect of immigrant students and more diversity in the classroom on the other students. While for Italy, Frattini and co-authors showed that there's a small negative effect of having a higher immigrant share, which is specifically strong for low ability students, and they find that is also dependent on the language diversity in the classroom. And on the other hand, Bretman and Orton also found that there is a negative effect of immigrant students, but it's not dependent on the language diversity in the classroom. So there's been very mixed results in different countries. There doesn't seem to be one clear evidence on the effect of immigrant students. And then we contribute largely to the literature that looks at language learning as a key factor for educational performance and integration. Also, there's mixed evidence. Looking at the PISA results, Isfering and Orton showed that speaking the language has a positive effect on the math result. For the US, it was Phenol, they showed that the math results are not dependent on the language skills. So also there's a little bit of mixed evidence on how the language affects the other test scores. The data we use, so I already said it briefly, we have administrative data from the city-state of Hamburg. There we have, for the years 2013 to 2015, so the starting cohorts in 2013 to 2015, the universe of all children, and we can follow them till 2019, so just before the corona pandemic started. And then we basically construct our sample, which is only consistent of refugee students, but we don't have the resident status. So we define as a refugee student children who immigrated to Germany in or after 2013, and those that are from Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Eritrea, and Syria, because those are the countries that basically have the highest application rates, but also the highest acceptance rates in Germany. Then we can merge this data with the RWI GeoGrid data, which is socioeconomic data on the 1 by 1 kilometer grid, which we can match to the schools. So we know, 1 by 1 kilometer around the school, characteristics like the unemployment, purchasing power, the credit risk, and also a little bit the composition of the population. And then those are the outcomes we have in our data. So in the administrative data, we already have the school form. So we know the school track the children go to after 4th grade. So once they switch the schools, and then they were able to match it with standardized test scores in grade 5. And they are called the Kermit test results. And this is why Hamburg is very great, because they do this extra test in grade 5 as well, which is not national in Germany. So this test is supposed to give teachers at the new school a little bit of an idea of the composition of their classroom, which educational needs the classroom has, and maybe where there's some deficiencies or where they're better. The test is done by trained external test conductors, and the kids are tested in German, English, math, and natural science. And then, yeah, there would be, but it's unfortunately too late for us. They also test additionally in grade 7 and grade 9. And then also part of the national test, which is called VERA, maybe for the Germans who probably know it, the national comparison test in Germany in grade 3 and 8. So we also have this result in grade 3 and for one cohort in grade 7.
Yes, just one clarification question before we continue with the design. When you define refugees, would you just consider the country of origin, or would you also consider the status that they have, as if they have a right to work? Sorry, to stay. Vinta is asking us.
So unfortunately, we do not know the resident status.
Yeah.
It is not collected in the data, in the school data. So we do not know this. So we proxy quite conservative those nationalities and kids who came after 2013. So when the kind of the influx began a little bit. So it's a proxy for being a refugee, which we try. I can show you later in the robustness checks. We also try a little around with the nationalities and arrival dates. Yeah. Okay, if there's no more questions, I just want to give you a short introduction about the school system in Germany. And here specifically, this is for Hamburg. So children who turn 6 at the summer before the school starts, basically, they have the obligation to go to school. So they enter elementary school, which is basically all kids together. And this is also when our sample arrives. So we only accrue children that arrive in elementary school, so before they are changing the school. Then after 4th grade, the children have 2 choices in Hamburg. So they can either go to the gymnasium, which leads after 12 years of schooling to a degree that certifies to go to university or a technical university, or they can go to a comprehensive school in Hamburg that's called a city district school. And also there they can get a high school degree that qualifies for university, but it's with 1 year longer of schooling. So they would go for 13 years to school, or they have the option to go after 10th or 9th grade to vocational or technical school. And after the 4th grade, so the kids switch the school, is the tracking that we're going to look at. And important here is that the teachers give a recommendation where the school track they suggest for the child, but the final decision is made by the parents. And then in 5th grade, we have our standardized tests that we look at. So both of our outcomes are then on the secondary school level. So the setting in Hamburg, or the models that they apply, is the 2 models that I showed you at the beginning. So Hamburg has international preparatory classes, which are parallel classes where the kids focus on German language learning. And usually they last up to 1 year, and also the maximum they're supposed to last is 1 year. And here they really focus on German. In Hamburg, they have 18 hours of German class during the year, during the week. And I don't know who's familiar with the German school system. This is basically kind of all you have. We only have usually half days of school. So then they only have 4 hours of math, 2 hours of science, and 2 hours of sports or physical education in 1 week. So they really have one strong focus on German. And the classes, the requirement is that they shouldn't be bigger than 15 students. So they're quite a bit smaller compared to regular classes. The average, what we see is that around 11 students are in those preparatory classes. And then to give you the full context, Hamburg also started the so-called basic classes, which have a bit of a focus more on students that might need a bit more attention. So it's mostly with a focus of alphabetization and German language learning for children that never visited a school or cannot read and write. So kids that actually might need a bit more one-on-one attention and not just learn the language. Again, here also the goal is to integrate the children as soon as possible into either the preparatory class for 1 year or to directly to the regular class, depending on how they do. So overall, the idea was that the parallel classes start in grade 3 and up, but I will show you in a little bit that they changed that a little bit over the years. However, what is important is that the capacities, especially 2015, 2016, were quite limited, and not enough schools were able to provide those classes directly, but the kids still had to go to the schools. Like the kids still had to start school in Hamburg. And this is a little bit what we're using. So here we can see the different cohorts, 13, 14, 15, and we can see that like starting in cohort 15, so also those kids arrived a little bit later. They also started those preparatory classes quite a bit earlier, also already in 1st or 2nd grade. And overall, the number of the classes has been increasing over the years. So our main empirical strategy relies on the assumption that due to the allocation of the
Pia, one small question, just
Yeah.
clarification, like, so you told that there was not enough capacity for these classes. So what did the government does? Like open more schools, open more classes for these children? Like how was the idea to fulfill all the requirements?
So no, so what I meant is that there were not enough schools that had capacities in those preparatory classes. So the children were still allocated to the schools that existed, but they were then just integrated into the regular classroom. So they were joining regular classes if there were not anymore any preparatory classes left.
Okay, so they don't open more classes, just like
I mean, some schools probably opened more classes. Like clearly some schools, like more classes were opened, especially over the years. But especially at the beginning, they couldn't follow kind of the demand for those classes.
Okay, and these classes that didn't, like these schools that didn't have enough capacity, do you think they have like are more prone to receive more immigrants like before this change, like depending on their, I don't know, their resources, their budget, maybe for different neighborhoods that are less with lower socioeconomic background, like
we looked at that in 2 slides.
Okay,
I'll show you that.
great.
We checked that the schools are not too different from each other.
Okay,
Of
great.
course, yeah. I'll show you that in a second. I think 1 or 2 more slides. So, right, our assumption is that the parents cannot decide where the child goes to, and it's the responsibility of the school information center where the child goes to based on proximity and availability. So we have our outcome, the educational success of the student in class C and school S, measured by the points in the standardized test score and tracking to the academic school track, the gymnasium. And our main explanatory variable is whether the child, like a dummy variable, whether the child has previously been observed in a preparatory class or not. And then we include a lot of like individual, school, neighborhood, and class controls to make sure nothing is influencing our results. And yeah, so here it comes. So we're making sure that the kids that go to preparatory classes, first of all, that the kids are not systematically differently sorted into those classes, but also not sorted to schools that are worse. So here we can see that there's no sorting going on based on nationality. The kids, I showed you that before, so the birth date is older because the older kids, especially at the beginning, were more likely to go to those preparatory classes. Important, the kids that have educational needs are actually a little less likely to go to those preparatory classes. And there is no sorting based on the social development index where the child lives. So it's not that kids from a worse or better neighborhood are sorted into the preparatory classes. And then importantly, we look at the school characteristics so that the schools are not different. And the first one is the test result for the Skirmet or the Vera exam in grade 3. So we average that on the school. Then we have the average of the development or social index in the school of all students and the children per school. And here we can see that they are not different based on whether the child visits a preparatory class or not. The only variable that's actually different is the children per class. So I told you that before, the classes are actually quite a bit smaller compared to the regular classes. And then we have, here we compare to the unemployment, the purchasing power, the share of foreign nationality in the neighborhood, and also the distance to the nearest refugee accommodation. And we don't see that there's any difference between the schools.
Yeah, so one question from the audience. So considering that this availability is limited for the first years, especially, like, how would they, as I said, make any decision if they have, for instance, I don't know, 10 migrants who would like to go to these schools, but they just have 5 slots? Like, do they decide then on their characteristics, or they still allocate it randomly?
So from what we know, they are allocated to the school that is nearest to them. And the school either offers a preparatory class or it doesn't. So this is then how they allocate it. And I mean, all the kids were accommodated, so all the kids found a spot in the schools. So yeah, it's a little bit of a black box how really it worked in this school information center. But from we talked to them, and from what we know is that, I mean, they found spots for every kid. It was just not always schools that offered those extra classes, which were implemented for them.
Okay, but then there is not an obvious way in which they say, okay, these kids would have preference, let's say, for a preparatory class. I understand, right?
No, exactly. It's really mostly looked for the proximity where the parents live, so that it's not too much of a burden where to go. And then if everything in the surrounding is full, then the next available school, basically.
Right. Thanks.
Right, so yeah, this is kind of our main results table. And the table shows the results of the average test score. So here we average out the results in German, English, math, and natural science to get just a general picture of how the children are doing. And yeah, whether they ever visited one of those preparatory classes or not. Compared to the children, so our control group here basically, who we compare them to, is children that directly were integrated into the regular classrooms with other native for the regular classes, basically. Importantly, so once we control for the individual controls, once we enter those, we also hold constant the first grade the child goes to and the immigration years to make sure that it's not a longer time in the German school system or a longer time in Germany at all that is driving our results, and the area where the children come from. Then we have in column 3 the school and neighborhood controls, and in column 4 also class controls. And included in class controls is also peer effect, so the average test result in the classroom. So we control for that. And we can see that visiting, like a child that has visited one of those separate preparatory classes that focuses on language learning, is doing 0.19 standard deviation points worse on average in all the tests pulled together. And to give you a bit of an idea maybe of the effect size, so refugee children are doing on average 1 standard deviation point worse in this test in 5th grade compared to non-refugee students. And maybe like a reference from the literature, the paper by Sule Allen looking at social cohesion in Turkey for Syrian refugees, where they really didn't have like an academic program. They really just had like perspective taking and how the kids are received from the Turkish students. And refugee students in the treated classes actually received 0.13 standard deviation points more in Turkish tests that they administered after. So really that kind of a nice environment has already a large effect on the test results. So we used 2 alternative strategies, and sorry for my discussant, one wasn't in the paper yet that I sent out, but we use a little bit the variation that was happening over the years and also with the age of the students. So we use that older students, especially at the beginning, were more likely to go to those preparatory classes, and that more classes were implemented over the years. So we interact the birth date and immigration year as an instrument for visiting those preparatory classes. And I'll show you the results of that in a second. And then we have a second alternative strategy that looks that uses that more preparatory classes were implemented over the years. So we can hold, like, so it means also within a school, they might not have had a preparatory class at the beginning, but they might had it like in the later years. So we can compare students that go to the same school just in later years. And here I'm running a little late, so I'm going to go quickly through those. So we see that instrumenting visiting a preparatory class by birth date and immigration year, again, introducing the control variables step by step, is the effects are very robust to that, and even a little bit stronger when we use the instrument. And then here clearly our observations are reduced by a lot because we use the schools that are changing. And we can see that holding the first school the child goes to, comparing children that go to the first school, the effect and also the effect size are very similar to what we found in general. So next we look at the different subjects separately. And we can see that the kids that visit a preparatory class are doing significantly worse in all of the subjects. And I showed you a little bit the schedule they have, so it might not be such a surprise that they do worse in math, English, and natural science because they focus more on German in 1 year. But what is a little bit surprising is they actually have kind of the worst result in the German test. So they perform 0.25 standard deviation points worse in the German test in 5th grade if they visited a preparatory class. And then we look at our second outcome, so whether the child is basically tracked to the gymnasium, the more academic school, and there seems to be a negative correlation. But once we control for all of our controls, so once we also implement the class controls, there is no significant effect anymore. So it's not significantly different from 0 if the kid visited preparatory class or not.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just to let you know that you have about 5 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And was I? Yes. Okay, and then we look a little bit at heterogeneity. So here we split our sample by gender. And the effect, so for boys and girls, it's not statistically significantly different from each other, but we can see that girls are performing slightly worse than boys in the tests if they visit a preparatory class. And here again, this is the average test result for all the subjects pulled together. And then we look at the country of origin, so where the children are born. And actually kids from Iran, if they go to the regular class, they're doing significantly better than the other students that we define as refugees. But it seems to be the group that is performing the worst if they visit a preparatory class in the standardized test score. Also kids from Syria and Afghanistan perform worse if they visit those parallel classes. Only kids from Iraq, that we don't see a difference between those that visit a preparatory class and those who don't. But maybe keep in mind for Iran and Iraq, the sample numbers are getting a little bit smaller. Yeah. And then we look a little bit if other initial conditions might have an effect combined together with visiting of preparatory classes. So here we look first at the quality of school at the first school the kids go to, and then at the foreign share, so in the neighborhood where the child goes to. And so if the child goes to a school with an above median climate share, that means that this school performed above the median. It was a bit surprising. It doesn't seem to have a strong effect on the performance of the child. And neither does it if we interacted with being in a school or being assigned to a preparatory class. If the school is in a neighborhood above the median with considering foreign share, we see that this has overall a slightly negative impact on the performance of the children. But once we interacted with visiting a preparatory class, there doesn't seem to be a difference anymore. And so it was a little bit puzzling because those classes were implemented really to focus on German language learning, and they get more attention to practice the language. They have a certified teacher, but still they're performing worse even in German. And like one possibility we thought about is that this is the first environment in a new country, in a new school, and like where they enter. And that maybe this is also the spot, like the point where they form their first friendships, and maybe those are long-lasting friendships. So here we look at the number of pupils that the kid is observed in the first class they enter in Hamburg, and then in 5th grade, and in the last observation we have, so how many are still in the same classroom together. And overall, refugee students are staying together with less students from the initial classroom compared to non-refugee students. But we can see that those who visit a preparatory class are staying together with slightly more children from the very first classroom. So an interpretation would be like, on the positive side, it seems that they are actually maybe forming a few more friendships in these classrooms, but then like to explain kind of the negative results on the test scores is that this effect, this friendship is with students that are also non-German speakers. So even if they interact in German, it's not with a native speaker.
Sorry, Pia, but they can choose where classroom to stay, the refugees?
No, like they usually cannot. And this is why we look at it when they switch schools, because of, and this is really more anecdotal, but this is kind of what we assume. So if you change schools and you're from the same elementary school, coming to the secondary school, they are more likely to also put you together in a classroom, or you can name a friend you want to be together in a classroom with or something, but we do not know what they do there. We just see that there's more observed together, and it was just an interpretation that we had for it. Yeah.
Yeah. We could also be nice, like to look like what's the probability of changing schools, like compared to natives, like maybe.
I mean, they have to change school. Like after 4th grade, the children have to change
it shows
school.
that everyone has.
So they have to, and this is kind of the school change we look at if they stay together with more kids from the first classroom. And how they do it, we don't know if how this process is for them. But this is a little bit in line with the next mechanism we look at. If the kids are in a classroom in the secondary school, so once they change the school, with a higher immigrant share, and we can see that the kids that visit a preparatory class are in classrooms with a higher immigrant share. And here we define an immigrant as a student that comes from a non-German speaking country since 2013. So they're in classrooms with more non-German native speakers as well after they switch the school. I think I only have very few minutes, so we have a bunch of robustness checks. Maybe one that is a little important, so we don't observe if the child has test result under a certain threshold, it might be recorded as missing. So we don't know how low the child is actually performing or didn't participate at all because of the ability. So here we censor our results to the lowest test score that we ever observe. And run a censored regression. We have a few more observations due to that for 120 more students. And even though it's not standardized here because we use this cutoff, the results are very similar, both in magnitude, but clearly you can see also the sign. We do not see that there's a difference visiting a preparatory class and actually participating at all in the test. So they are not sorted in that sense. Then we introduce a few more fixed effects at the secondary school and the results hold. We play around, as I said before, a little bit with the composition, what we define as refugee students. So a later date of arrival, only kids that arrived later in the school grades, more nationalities, and we also look at only Syrian refugees. And we can see that the sample size clearly gets smaller again, but the result is staying pretty similar if we only use this one group, where likely there has not been so much sorting going on. Right, we can look in the discussion into the different robustness checks if you're interested. So to conclude, we find that attending a parallel preparatory class upon arrival leads to worse educational outcomes for refugee children relative to being directly integrated into the regular classroom. Attending those parallel classes has a particularly strong effect on the math and German results and on female students and students from Iran. We do not find that visiting a parallel preparatory class has an effect on the choice of secondary school tracks, so whether they go to the gymnasium or not. But we do see that students who attend those classes are staying together with more classmates from their initial classroom, and that they are observed in classrooms with a higher migrant share once they switch the school. So thank you very much. That was all for me. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Pia, for this super interesting presentation. So before jumping to the open discussion with all the attendees, we have the discussion made by Diego Marino Fages. So Diego, if you want to share your slides, and you have about 10 minutes.
Thank you. Okay. So first of all, thank you for the presentation. It's a very interesting topic. In fact, I was happy to read about this topic because of my own experience. I lived when I was in high school. I lived in Germany for a year, doing like this exchange, and there was a lot of people from other countries as well. So we kind of had this hypothesis because some of us went to some schools where it was like only Germans, and some were like going to some more mixed schools, and we did notice the difference that I think this was an excuse, but I learned less German than some of my other friends who were assigned in schools with more Germans. But anyway, so I think the topic is really interesting, but I just have some concerns with the identification that I think you can do some things I'm going to propose. So first, we all know the paper studies the effect of an educational integration model, which focuses on language acquisition on academic success of immigrant children. And so my comments will be based on the draft that unfortunately didn't have this IV part, but anyway, so one thing I think at the beginning, like when you explain the German system, it would be nice to have like a diagram also for all the possibilities that the immigrants can have. Like, I mean, they could either go to basic class, preparatory class, the regular class in schools that have preparatory class, or regular class in schools that do not have. Do they have a chance to go directly to a private school if they have money, for example, or do they have any other option? Can they relocate again somewhere else? Like, I think it's very nice to have like all these options and to maybe have percentages of people going in each direction, then to have like an idea of what could be random and what is not. So, but then, of course, you will exhaust all possible paths here, and this would help you for the identification, which is what I'm going to talk now. So in the paper, I've seen the idea of two potential sources of exogenous variation. One of them is this idea that they cannot really choose whether the school have this option of preparatory class or not. And the other idea of oversubscription, right? So basically you go to a school that has this preparatory class, but because it's full, you don't get it. So you go to the normal class. So these are two good sources of exogenous variation, but the thing is that you have to convince us that this is really random. So for example, let me see. Okay, so in both cases, I have like many ideas of why this could not be random. So like when the schools have this preparatory class or not. Sorry, I can't really see my slides because of the Okay, now it should be better. Who decides whether the school has this preparatory class or not? I think you mentioned some authority, but I don't know whether this authority is at the school level, at the district, or like how does it interact? Then if the schools, in the schools that do have them, like who decides whether children goes to the prep class or the regular class? Is it like just based on first come, first serve, or not? Because if that were the case, then you can compare those that like just happen to come a little bit later and compare with the ones that like actually got a place in the prep class. Then can the parents do anything if they are not happy with the allocation? Like, can they go talk to the principal and say, hey, my kid actually needs the prep class or not, or something like this? Like maybe anecdotal evidence would be enough for this. And because at the end also you show that the probability of being in the same class with another student who was in prep class is higher in 5th grade. So this already gives us a sense that the allocations are not really random, right? So I think this goes against this story. Okay, so what else I think you could do? Is there any evidence that preparatory classes are allocated? So I said this already. So something else you could use is whether this allocation of children to schools with or without the dual system. I mean, this is more plausible to be exogenous, right? You just go to a place and maybe the school has, maybe the school hasn't. You will have to explain that I mean the principals of the schools are not like so different. Like maybe one of them says, okay, we want to have these preparatory classes because they want to segregate the students, they don't like immigrants, for example, or it could be the opposite, right? They really think that this will help the immigrants, so they do it. So even if you have anecdotal evidence for this, I think it would help. But exploiting this source of variation, you can do two things that are a bit different from your question, but I think goes in the same direction. So the effect of having this dual system, does it help overall to the natives and the migrants, right? Because this is, we can, like, let's assume this is completely random. So imagine we give some principals the chance to actually sort students in a different way. And some other schools, we don't give them the option, right? So then you can compare the outcomes in both and you say, okay, if you have the option, you do better or you do worse in general, right? And then you can look separately for immigrants and non-immigrants. And then you can also compare, I mean, first for the migrants, and then you can also compare for the natives, how they are doing. Like of course, you only compare the regular class in the school with preparatory class against the school that doesn't have the preparatory class. So basically, the other thing that you could do is like compare for the natives, what is the effect of having higher quality immigrants? Because if in the schools that have preparatory classes, basically, if the principals are selecting like the worst German speakers to go to the prep classes, like you are kind of selecting to have the better speakers in the regular class, right? So in one school, you will have like all of them, and in one you have only the selected that speak the best. Okay, so you can actually identify this effect. What else? Yeah, I think I said this already. So, okay, then I also have some comments. I don't know how much time I have left.
I think
about 3 minutes.
Okay, so I mean, I can say something now, but if you want, I can also meet you at some other time to tell you some things about the mechanisms, because I think like I was excited to read the mechanisms, but then I was kind of disappointed a bit because there was not much. I mean, not a lot of evidence, at least in the draft here. Like I think you added something else in the presentation, but yeah, I think I think there were more ideas that you can explore. Like, for example, I don't know what about the quality of the teachers in the teaching English in the preparatory classes. Like maybe these classes are so boring that like no one is learning anything. Or, of course, a big part of it will probably be these peer effects that maybe they just interact in other languages. That was my case with my classmates who were just speaking English most of the time. Maybe, yeah. So maybe for some people, if it is too easy, then they also get bored, or they might also learn to like live in this new environment without speaking German. So they just okay. And so the IB part wasn't in the paper, but I think it, like, that's what
it was
I
small
was
in the robustnesses, but maybe
okay,
maybe
yeah,
not big
so,
enough. Yeah.
I would really think about the IB. I think it makes sense because of like it's like the randomness is not perfect, but at the same time you are buying yourself a lot of problems with the IB that you will have to justify. So I'll think quite a bit about that first. So yeah, I think these are my comments, and I will have to run soon, but later if you want we can talk again. I have some like minor comments about the draft as well that maybe you find them useful.
Great, Diego. Thank you so much for your
Thank you.
discussion. I think that was very insightful, I think, and useful. So please, like, do get in touch as well with Pia, with Diego later. Thanks a lot. Let's open the discussion now. I think there are some questions that are also related with some of the issues that Diego tackled. I'm just going to start with some questions that were in the Q&A before, and then maybe we can start with Alex. So I have questions from Julio, Manasi, and Isabella. Julio, would you like to ask your question directly? So let me just unmute you so that you can.
Yeah, I think it was already mentioned by Diego, so I think it's fine. It's like on the rules of, I mean, can you all hear me? Yeah, no? Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, it's also regarding the randomness, because on the rules of the assignments, the wishes of the parents are also taken into account sometimes, and also the previous education are taken into account. But this is related to the questions that also Diego had before.
Should I answer still that, or should we go on?
Yes,
I think we can go on. Like these are the same questions that Diego already asked. So yeah.
Great, thank you. I think Manasi had another question more on the mechanisms. If you would like to, Manasi, to go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, I was just wondering again, as Diego already asked about different mechanisms that could be at play, because I mean, there might be other things again, like peer effects, and so I'm really unfamiliar with the context, but this result is quite striking to me, and I was just wondering if you know, you could have different what different mechanisms you could have that might explain this.
Yeah, so I answer. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, with the mechanisms, so we have administrative data, we have not data on teachers, so that is a problem that we cannot change or address. Regarding the mechanisms of maybe co-nationals in the classroom, so we look at the share of same nationality students in your first classroom, so the share of Syrians for a Syrian student, the share of Afghan students for Afghans in the classroom. And we do not see that there's a strong impact of that in the preparatory classes. So we do not see much of an evidence for anything happening there or anything influencing the test results based on the share of co-nationals in the classroom. Yeah, regarding the other, like any other mechanisms of social ties and so on, we do not see much. We don't have a questionnaire or anything of the students, so we don't know so much what's going on, or what we can do is observe kind of the classrooms and environments they are in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Pia. And then there was another question from Isabella, I think more on clarification. So Isabella, if you want to ask your question directly.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, actually, it was a clarification question, but also then there would come a follow-up question about the mechanism. But I mean, since you cannot really, your previous answer made me realize that this is not something that you can observe. But so what I was thinking, the table with the regression was a little bit fast for me, so I didn't quite like catch all the like different fixed effects that you were using. But so what you were essentially comparing is at the end, like two refugee children that were born in the same year that arrived to Germany in the same year as well, and then one of them was in the preparation course and one wasn't, right? Is that correct?
Right, and they started the school also in the same
at the
class
same time.
grade.
Okay, yeah. So because what I was thinking is that then they take this grade 5 test when one is like, let's say 12, I don't know, I don't know let's say one is 12 and the other one is 13. So assuming that they complete this 1 year of preparation course. So I was actually wondering whether maybe another mechanism could be some kind of stigma coming from being older than your peers in the classroom. I don't know whether this is something that you can check or.
Yeah, we actually do look a little bit into that, and we do see that this might just be by design, that students who visit those preparatory classes, that in 5th grade they are slightly older than the other students. And this could be because they might repeat a grade, we don't know, because they put the preparatory classes like grades together, so 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 is together, so we don't know the exact grade the kid starts at in those preparatory classes. But looking at the age they kind of should have in 5th grade, they are slightly older if they visit the preparatory classes. But we haven't thought about the idea that this might be an effect that they are the oldest kind of in the classroom. That could be going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex has another question as well.
Right, just briefly to clarify, so I understand it's hard to bring additional data, but because this whole story is apparently about social interactions, I just wonder, some sort of time use data, I know that Germany has this service, might be possible to link somehow, to see like who do you hang out with, what do you do outside of the class, or something like that, if this is a story about the contact hypothesis, all these things that, you grow kind of, this appreciation of out groups by, being exposed to them and things like that. And generally, who do you network with? Maybe some sort of Facebook data. You can look like what groups, people click on Facebook. Do they become interested in local whatever things? I don't know what is like a quote unquote German interest on Facebook, but I recall this paper by, I think, was it maybe Emilio Zagani, who was looking at how refugees and migrants are getting more interested on Facebook in like soccer versus other things, or like beer versus other things, with the idea that, soccer and beer are kind of German quote unquote interests. And I think they were looking at Turkish migrants, if I recall correctly. So basically how this integration was working in these terms, and this was kind of cool. So maybe if you could link something like that, it would be interesting. And the second thing is more like a general contribution sort of thing, because there is this discussion, right? This language, it matters for the kinds of jobs that you take and the kinds of career trajectories that you go, right? That language, that certain occupations are more elastic with respect to language skills. And I don't know if it's possible, right? If I understood from the data, you have a few years, right, elapsed at this point. So you probably don't see occupational outcomes. Is this right?
No, the last observation we have is in grade 7.
Right, so it's a bit
So
early.
it's very short-term results that
Very
we have
short-term,
so
right.
far, but since we compare, we have different cohorts, and the corona pandemic started for some kids in elementary school, for some kids in the secondary school. It's not really making sense to look at later years, because then we compare really different outcomes. We have for one group the tests in 7th grade, but really only one cohort.
Well, actually,
And-
coronavirus has a disruption to interactions. If your story is about interactions, maybe you can actually get something from it. Because like if you were in a completely isolated class, doesn't matter, right? If you were interacting and then this was disrupted, maybe this matters, but this is just a hypothesis. But yeah, very interesting. Thanks a lot.
No, thank you for the comment. Yeah, and I agree with your comment on social interaction, but I mean, this is just a mechanism we look at. Really, the paper is about the different integration programs and how the kids perform in the test results. And we just try to find a little bit like an explanation or an idea of why, even though they are taught from special teachers, why they're still performing worse. And there was an idea, I think, yeah, we looked at some surveys in Germany, but once we actually cut it down to the area we're in and kids going to the different classrooms in the same age group, I think I looked at it only like a year ago, but we have very, very few observations to really base anything off of, unfortunately. But an idea is to do to combine that, but yeah, we can look closer at how to do that.
Thank you. We have one more question from the audience before we conclude. Alice, if you can go ahead.
Thank you very much. I was just writing it in the chat anyway, just in case in the Q&A. So just it's a comment about, I think the way the question is raised in your paper, which I think it's an important question, but perhaps trying to convince that these preparatory classes are kind of randomly allocated, that the students are randomly allocated to these preparatory classes is not very, it's hard to be convincing, because it is a source of inefficiency. I mean, it's clear that schools, if you want to increase the learning of students, even in kind of standard schools, you try to put them in classes with students that are more like them, and you try to form some groups of students with the same difficulties and so on. So I think it's kind of unlikely that it is the case that the students are very randomly allocated to this kind of different classes, and perhaps there could be another way to identify the impact of having this system. And that could be maybe trying to do propensity score matching, or to do other, so perhaps like taking other venues to identify some impacts, and perhaps that could be maybe very much in line with what Diego was suggesting, but not trying to convince that there is a kind of a quasi random allocation, which I think is very unlikely. So first of in France, for example, there is a similar system where you have some refugee children who go to first some classes that prepare them to go to normal classes, and you have some refugee children who go directly to the classes, but this is clearly decided based on the characteristics of the children. So I don't say that the systems are the same, but it seems to be more let's say more efficient to do so. So just a question, but.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the comment. And yeah, exactly related a little bit to what Diego said, we do one robustness checks, and sorry, Diego, that was also not in the paper yet, where we exclude children because we do not know when exactly in time they arrive. We only know the year. So we don't know if they were the last to arrive in the school and therefore not going to the preparatory class or not. So we exclude children that are visiting a school that offers those preparatory classes, but they don't go. So this could be because they're oversubscribed, or this could be because they are too good. So this is another robustness check that we do, and the results hold. So this is more like kind of what you suggested on the idea of really the random allocation, not in the school, but between schools. And then the other idea what we had, what I showed you, the second identification strategy, where we really look at the same schools in later years, and this having the effect of the schools implemented the integration classes only in later years and not at the beginning. Propensity score matching is something we could look at. We have not done that yet. We more included kind of the fixed effects on the things that we thought are important to compare, but this is something that we can definitely look at. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Pia. So there are several questions standing by, but I think if people are interested, they can stay after the conclusion of the seminar. For now, maybe it's a good idea to conclude this and to present.